Hello, everybody. I'm Ryan Heath, Senior Editor at Politico, and I'm hosting this latest IFA conversation series. And joining me is Ellen Weintraub, Commissioner at the Federal Election Commission. Welcome, Ellen.
Thank you so much.
Now, you've had some difficulty at the FEC operating at your full functionality and capacity. You've lacked a quorum for a few months now, but it's a big election year. And so you obviously have a lot of things that you're thinking about, talking about, worrying about in this election season. I thought I might ask you, seeing as we've seen this election fiasco really in Wisconsin in April, and now we have this ongoing pandemic, what are the pandemic-related concerns and actions that you as a FEC commissioner are taking this election year?
Well, I want to be clear that the FEC does not oversee the running of the elections at the state and local level, but obviously as a commissioner on the Federal Election Commission, I am very concerned about what happens in our elections. And this year, I think it's going to be very challenging. People were first expecting a very high turnout election. Now I've heard some people predicting it might be a very low turnout election. But the bottom line is that it's an important election, and people ought to be able to exercise their right to vote without jeopardizing their health and their safety and their lives and the health and the lives of their loved ones. I don't think anyone wants to see a repeat of what happened in Wisconsin with the Supreme Court weighing in the night before the election and perhaps some confusion over whether people were going to be voting in person on Election Day or weren't going to be voting in person on Election Day. They ended up with very long lines. Voters who were exercising in a timely fashion their right to request absentee ballots didn't receive them on time, and their votes ended up not getting counted. So all of this really needs to be planned for so that it doesn't get repeated on a large scale in November. And it can be. And I do believe that there are many conscientious election officials around the country who are trying to plan for this. However, there are going to be some challenges this year that people don't usually face. Whether states choose to encourage it or not, many voters are going to try to vote absentee. They're not going to want to be standing in line. Mm-hmm. And that's going to create new challenges for the states that are not used to doing it. There are about 5 states that have been running largely absentee mail-in votes for a number of years, and they're good at it. They know how to do it. They can advise their colleagues in other states on how to do this right, but it's going to require advanced planning. It's going to require money because they're going to have to buy the envelopes and the paper and the ballots, and they're going to have to be postage paid so that people don't have to go scrambling around looking for postage stamps, which a lot of people never use anymore because they're so used to communicating digitally. And the election administrators are going to have to plan probably for voting in advance and for larger spaces, and just kind of thinking through all the mechanics of how to vote safely so that those who choose to vote in person can do so safely, but all of the voters who choose to vote by mail will also have their votes counted.
I'm glad you raised the mail-in ballot situation. We've seen some legislation tabled in Congress, and I look at opinion poll surveys, and it shows that there's a really high level of popularity for the idea that anyone who wants a mail-in ballot should be able to get it. It's a bit less popular if you tried to turn the whole election into a mail-in only election. Do you or your fellow commissioners take a position on making sure that everyone does have a right to a mail-in ballot?
As I said, we don't have a formal role in this, and we're not taking a formal position. I personally believe that everyone who wants to vote by mail ought to be able to vote by mail. Every American citizen ought to have that opportunity, particularly if they're concerned about their health. And this year, there are obvious reasons why people would be concerned about their health. So, and I think, as you pointed out, it's very popular. There are a lot of people who want this. And whether states choose to encourage it or not, there will be many more requests from the voters to vote by mail. So they're just going to have to get geared up for it.
Now, one of the effects of having more mail-in voting is that it takes a little bit longer to count the results. I think we saw in Wisconsin, maybe it was up to 6 days before we got the results there. What is your warning or your tip for people who are anxious to get the results? Because clearly people want to know as soon as possible, but we might not be in a situation of knowing on election night this year.
Well, this pandemic is really teaching us a lot of lessons about patience and waiting. And they're not always welcome lessons, but I think everyone really needs to just prepare for this mentally, that it may not be the kind of election night that we're used to, where we're waiting up late and the election results come in, and then as the polls close, the newscasters start announcing things online, on television and online. And I think that if people prepare for that, we can cope with that. Americans have done this before. I wrote an op-ed with a Princeton historian, Kevin Cruz, in the New York Times that pointed out that there have been many instances in our history where people haven't known the election results on election night. And I think that one positive lesson from Wisconsin, there aren't a lot of positive lessons from the Wisconsin election, but one was that even though it took 6 days to count, nobody leaked the results. People were concerned that the results might start to leak out. Nobody leaked the results. It was done in a professional manner. And when there was an upset election for a Supreme Court race, the loser graciously conceded and said the people have spoken, and that's the way we do things in America. And I think that does set a good example for the rest of us, that we can, if we have to, wait. And it's worth waiting to find out the results accurately. We want to make sure that every vote counts.
Now, of course, most of the news agenda at the moment is dominated by all of these COVID pandemic related stories, but all the existing issues and risks and concerns around an election, they don't disappear just because a pandemic arrives. I noticed that you were on NBC this month and you felt the need to remind people that accepting opposition research from any foreign entity is illegal in the US. I was wondering, was that just a friendly reminder, or was it prompted by some information or case that had come across your desk?
I don't think that's an older interview. I don't think that was this month. But the issues that I've been concerned about in our election, the problems of dark money, the role of the mega donors, and certainly the risk of foreign interference, I think are real, and they haven't gone away. And indeed, for those who are trying to interfere in our elections, this presents an opportunity for them when all of our attention is moving to another area and nobody's paying as close attention to other problems that could arise. Those problems haven't gone away. And those who are seeking to make mischief, seeking to sow discord, seeking to interfere in our elections from abroad, and unfortunately there are also some people who are copycatting those disinformation techniques even here domestically, all of those problems are still out there, and people need to be very cognizant of that, particularly when you are gathering information and right now in particular, since we are all gathering our information online, right? We're not gathering around the water cooler anymore and talking to our colleagues about public affairs. Everything that we are learning, we are getting from our computers these days and from our television sets. And so it's particularly important with what we are learning online to be very careful about what we're consuming and what we are sharing, and making sure that it comes from a reputable source, because all of our intelligence agencies have confirmed that they are anticipating that there will be foreign interference in our election from the Russians, from the Iranians, from the Chinese. We don't know from whence it will come, but American elections are a big deal. There are people around the world who are concerned about it, and there are people who do not have our best interests at heart, or the best interest of our country at heart, that may seek to interfere, if only to sow chaos and undermine our democratic institutions. So people just need to be very wary about that.
Is that what you would classify as the highest risk to this election, or is there's something else out there that we need to be concerned about in the run-up to November?
Well, I think the number one concern that everybody has is, how are we going to vote in the middle of a pandemic? How are people going to conduct their campaigns? We may not be able to, campaigns may not be able to go out and knock on doors. They may not be able to hold rallies. They may not be able to do all of the normal campaign activities that we've come to expect. And that's going to be a challenge for reaching their voters and reaching all voters. So, I'm concerned about the campaign. I'm concerned about the voting process itself. There's plenty to be concerned about.
Now, maybe if we swing it back to how the FEC operates, because you're a critical voice in this process, what's the immediate future for you while you don't have this quorum? Is that going to change anytime soon?
Well, we are hoping that it actually might change sometime soon. As you've pointed out, for the last 9 months, almost 9 months, we have not had a quorum. There are supposed to be 6 commissioners, and we are down to 3, and it takes 4 commissioners to make most important decisions. We have an enforcement docket right now of almost 350 cases, and there are about 227 decision points, ballots that are sitting on commissioners' desks right now where cases or fines or other actions at the FEC that require 4 votes have been stopped, and they're waiting for a commission decision. So that's a substantial part of our increasing enforcement docket that is just at a stop right now. And it is really important that we regain the quorum and that the agency is able to do its job, because the good news is that even though we're all on mandatory telework now, our staff have been doing a terrific job. Our core mission of making sure that the American public is informed about where the money's coming from and where it is being spent in American elections is ongoing. All the reports continue to be filed. They continue to be uploaded. Our staff continue to analyze them. So all of that good work is ongoing, and the American public is not deprived of the basic information about who is supporting which candidates. However, we also have this important enforcement role. We have a rulemaking role. We have an advisory role, and none of those things can go on until we have 4 commissioners.
And what's the catch-up situation there? Is this poor 4th person who's about to join you, do they literally have to do a year's worth of work to catch up on all of those dockets? Or are there recommended decisions and things that that person can assess pretty quickly once they're approved?
Well, it won't be starting from scratch in that all of those decisions are keyed up by recommendations from our staff, and there are staff right now in commissioners' offices who are preparing memoranda for and preparing to advise the commissioners, all of us. Once we are in a position to make those decisions. Those of us who are still there have been in a position to make decisions. I've been reviewing the ballots. I've been reviewing all of these decisions that have to be made. And of course, we're all happy to pitch in and help a new colleague in any way that we can. But yeah, it's going to be a heavy lift for somebody walking in the door. But staff have been thinking about the best ways of organizing it and how to prioritize the most important decisions, the most time-sensitive decisions. I'm particularly worried about matters where we are waiting for commission approval to start an investigation, and the clock is ticking against the statute of limitations. And there are some, certainly some major decisions, major matters involving foreign national complaints of foreign national interference, involving complaints about illegal money flowing into our election, and it behooves us all to really throw ourselves into this workload and try and get it done in as prompt a way as it's possible to do so.
Mm-hmm. Maybe one final, slightly more political question to finish on. The Commission is a bipartisan organization, but it is organized with the support of different party nominees. For example, you're supported by the Democratic Party. Do you think that with this hiatus or this break that's occurred with the quorum, that it's realistic to go back to normal? Are we going to return to the former way of doing things, or has everything shifted now? Is it going to be a very different dynamic going forward?
Well, I mean, the Commission has worked in different ways over the years. When I first came to the Commission, I've been there for quite a number of years now, there was a lot of effort on the part of commissioners to work across party lines and try and achieve consensus and try and find some place that 4 commissioners, at the time there were 6 commissioners, so 4 commissioners, we would look for a coalition of 4 that could agree on any particular issue. And I appreciated those efforts of all the commissioners to try and make the place work. In recent years, the Commission, like a lot of institutions in Washington, has become more polarized, and it's that consensus building is really broken down. I would love to see us get back to that. I don't want to make any predictions, but I do think that that is the best way for the Commission to function. I do not see myself as representing a party on the Commission. I believe that I'm there to do my best for the American people writ large, and I think that's the way every commissioner ought to view their job.
Commissioner Weintraub, thank you so much for joining us in this conversation.
Thank you, Ryan.